Well, we'll see how interesting it actually is. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, but just move on and talk a little bit about qualitative analyses of time experience, particularly in psychopathological states, and what we did to get at these phenomena in a, let's say, more empirical way. So I'll start you off with a little bit of background, primarily on the terminology that I'll be using. I looked at the students' presentations, and I noticed that hardly anyone seems to be doing qualitative research methods. So I'll focus a little bit more on those methods before going into results of our own studies, namely what I label time experience here. So time experience without, in people without a psychiatric diagnosis, and then into time experience and depression as a, let's say, showcase for a psychopathological investigation into time experience. And then I'll give you a summary of a variety of different mental disorders that we investigated with this method. All right. So starting with the terminology, now we don't have to agree on this, these terms and the way that I use them, but just to avoid confusion about what I am talking about or would like to talk about. So very roughly, you can divide these, the different research approaches into different terms. So on the one hand, you have people who are looking into what in the most recent literature is usually referred to as time perception. And then you have people who look at time experience, or in a broader sense, temporality. And time experience usually refers to quantitative data and quantitative research, while time experience and temporality refer to qualitative experiences and qualitative research. So on the one hand, you have psychophysics and cognitive science, maybe a little bit of neuroscience. And on the other hand, you have phenomenology, philosophy, and then classical descriptive psychopathology. Most of the talks you will hear will be on, can you see my cursor? Yeah, will be probably on this side and trying to bridge the gap between the two. But this talk will focus exclusively on this side. And as you've already heard in the previous talk, there is a lot of knowledge out there on what this qualitative experience of time may actually be, primarily from phenomenological thinkers, and then building on that, medical doctors, psychiatrists who have looked at the psychopathology of time experience. But what had been lacking until, let's say, 10 years ago was in a, let's say, more modern sense, empirical data on these experiences. And what the studies that I'll show you in this talk, and there are also some others, tried to do was to provide a little bit of qualitative empirical data on time experience and the psychopathological phenomena connected to them. So first off, if you want to investigate qualitative experiences, apart from using phenomenological methods, or if you want to use an empirical method, first of all, you need a tool to collect those data. And so what we came up with was an open-ended, or 7 open-ended questions, very broadly asking about time and time experience. And we passed those out as an open-ended questionnaire. We're now also doing interview studies with these questions, but the studies that I'll be showing you are exclusively open-ended questionnaire investigations. And so there were 7 questions. How do you experience the passage and flow of time? Does the passage and flow of time change in the presence of others? Does it change depending on surroundings or situation? Is the present a point in time, or is it extended? And if it's extended, how long is it? How do you experience the present, and what does it mean to you? How do you experience the past, and what does it mean to you? And how do you experience the future, and what does it mean to you? If you paid attention during last talk, you will notice that this is not just coming from anywhere, but it's very loosely based on this distinction between flow and structure. The first 3 questions address something like the flow of time or the passage of time, while the last 4 questions address what we call, or we refer to as the structure of time, namely those temporal concepts of past, present, and future. All right, diving further into the method, as you can probably imagine, if you pass out questionnaires like these, the data that you will collect will differ immensely in quality and content. So you may get a questionnaire such as this one. You don't have to read this. This is the content of it is not important. But here you can see a participant wrote something in a very structured and very readable way. Or you can get something like this. I personally enjoy looking at these, but they're a little bit more work if you want to know what's actually in them. And when you're looking at larger groups of people, you're actually looking for, are there common themes across different types of data that look so differently and may be written very differently. So what you need is a method that can account for that and kind of smooth over those different presentations and help you then analyze and, more importantly, interpret what people are telling you about something, in this case, about time experiments. So we picked a fairly common method in qualitative research, which is called in English summarizing content analysis. It is, as I said, a very widely used qualitative research method. And what it does is in two steps, two very structured steps, it helps you organize that data that you collected from wherever you want, in this case, from different groups of persons who wrote short texts on time and time experience. And the first step is that you summarize that content. That's what it's called. So you take that raw material, 1 or 2 or 3 of those questionnaires or answers to those questionnaires, short essays, and you screen for anything that appears unnecessary, redundant, or repetitive. And you delete those statements and utterances. So in the end, you end up with only those things that you deem important and on point concerning that topic. And then you isolate those single statements. And what you then end up, and then you paraphrase those statements into understandable common language. This last step, depending on what you're looking at, is more or less important. But what you end up with afterwards is, you don't have to read everything it says here, just to give you an impression what these things look like. On the left side here, you see the paraphrases, these single statements, and on the right side, you see the first 1.5 participants of one of our studies. So for each person, you have a countable number of utterances those persons made, and then you can further look at these statements. So what you do in the second step is you analyze what you have there. And to that end, you take those single paraphrases that I just showed you, and you assign what's called a category to them. So an even broader paraphrase statement that you now reuse across participants. So participants had different paraphrases, different utterances on certain questions. And now you generalize into categories and you reuse those categories across participants. And then you can say how similar or not similar certain answers to, in this case, our questionnaire were. And you repeat that step over and over again until you say, now I cannot find out anything more about this material, and this is what people said. And what you then end up with is, again, don't read this. We'll go through a little some examples of these categorical systems in just a few seconds. What you end up with is a list of categories And then you can provide examples, what participants actually said, and you can label them. And then you can say, this is basically what the entire group said about this topic. So this is an example from participants without a disorder without a psychiatric disorder. Now you can start interpreting what this may mean as a whole. So what you do with these type of research methods is you take something very individual, very complex and complicated, and you transfer it into something more generalized across the group that you can later analyze. And basically, this is what most of these types of qualitative research methods do. So so let's move on to a few examples of our own studies. Just give you a few examples on what participants without a diagnosis of mental disorder had replied to this to our questionnaire. People may say something like, time passes quicker when I do something nice, time drags when I'm doing something that's not nice or uninteresting or stupid. The present is what I'm currently doing, it's where I'm currently at in my life. The present is important to me. I have learned from past experiences. The past has made me who I am today. The future is uncertain, but I prepare the future in the past and in the present. Obviously, as you saw on the earlier slide, the participants said a lot more than this, but especially compared to other studies that we did, this is kind of the distinctive part of this type of time experience. And the other categories and statements more or less revolved around something that involves these types of statements. So to make this a little more understandable, what that might mean in a broader sense for time and time experience, I've prepared a little animation. If we take this time experience in mentally healthy individuals and we think about it as obviously spanning across time, then what we see is that people in time can locate different events of their personal life. You're represented by the little lines here, and they can order them chronologically. However, that's not it. That's not what time is to the people that we asked or that we passed those questionnaires out to. What happens is that along the timeline, these different activities or single events are made part of an overarching broader activity, which then may constitute something like the present. So the present isn't, for example, my favorite example is when I go grocery shopping. You know, I may say, first I leave my house and then I walk to the store and then I enter the store and then I put my vegetables or I don't know, ice cream into my basket and then I go to the cashier and I pay. I don't do one thing after the other, but it is part of an overarching present activity that I'm trying to perform. And after that, there may be something else. I may start cooking. So I'm boiling a pot and then I'm throwing the vegetables in. I'm not a very good cook, obviously. But importantly, these different presents are then again in some way connected. They they have a meaningful relationship with one another. And in that sense, time moves on and on and on. And it does not have to be restricted to something as, let's say, menial as grocery shopping. You could say, for example, my current present is I'm a student and I have to take exams and prepare for them. But then at some point I take the final exams or I do internships and then I move on into my work life and maybe a life of career and whatever. So This is very generally how we structure and then experience and talk about time with each other, and how we make sense of it for ourselves. Now, the most important thing about this is that during all this this time, there's a red line through all of it. So you live from the present, from the past through the present into the future, and the sense making enables you to do this, to live your life, let's say, future directed. And what's very interesting is that this concept is what many of the old philosophers and psychopathologists also said about time. And so you can isolate this from statements from let's say, regular people. And this is usually referred to as lived time, because as you earlier heard in my talk and the previous talk, you can, of course, conceptualize time in a, let's say, in a physical way. However, that is usually not how we do address time. So time is something that we live through, that we live by, that is a living resource to us, and not something that is, you know, physically measured by us on an everyday basis, or at least that's not what makes it important to us. All right, this much about time experience in a more general sense, and now to give you an example about time experience during a psychiatric disorder. Here, time and depression. So here are some statements that patients returned in our questionnaire. Patients may say something like, time is a merciless passage, time drags, time has stopped. The passage of time is meaningless to me. The present is evil and suffering. I'm unable to change anything. I feel guilty for my past mistakes. And I cannot think of the future anymore. The future is disconnected from the present moment. Again, the patients that participated in our study said a lot more than this. However, these were the most distinctive statements from patients. If you want to have a look at the whole list and also at the other patient groups that we investigated, refer to the respective publications, and then obviously cite the living hell out of them. So again, I tried to make a little animation to make this more understandable, what this may actually mean and how it relates to time experience in general. Again, if we picture time as single events, and patients with depression are usually able to still do this, there's a time period prior to the depressive episode where, for lack of a better term, things are moving along smoothly. However, at some point, depression hits, and what happens is that this future directedness of my own time, my own planning, myself living from the past to the present into the future, it runs into nothingness, into this big circle of depression and darkness. And this future directedness circles around, or time in general starts circling around, nothing else but the depressed experience and the experience of depression. And it literally retracts into the depressed moment. So someone who experiences something like this will say, I cannot move on, nothing is going on, time has stopped. It is all but this thing that is happening right now, namely suffering and depression. And this is also something, or very similar at least, to what the early psychopathologists who invested or who thought about time and time experience noticed, and they called this the inhibition of becoming, or the blocked future. Inhibition of becoming, meaning becoming for them was this living from the past through the present into the future, which is then inhibited for whatever reason in depression or the blocked future, emphasizing this inability to proceed into let's say a meaningful future. Now, the great thing about the particular method that we use is that you can take these observations, these interpretations of those statements, and you can order them into a list of symptoms, or let's say a symptomatology of time experience in a certain mental disorder. And as you know, as a medical doctor, I can only say that we love symptoms and structuring things in order to be able to recognize them more easily. And in this case, for depression, you can very broadly say time slows down and has stopped. And well, we did something like this for a variety of different disorders, and there are others who have done this for other disorders. I leave this on so you can read through it a little bit, what we believe is the symptomatology of time experience in different diagnoses. Yeah, and I'm open to your questions.